Welcome, viewers, to Video-a-Day Debruary. This is our 5th annual event. Today is day 13 as the month starts winding down almost to that halfway mark. Hope you've been enjoying everything that we've been showing you and teaching you so far. Our guest today is Annette Simmons. Annette is a keynote speaker, a consultant, and author of 4 books, one of which is it's called The Story Factor. It's on the 100 Best Business Books of All Time list. So, it's pretty impressive. Her latest work, Drinking from a Different Well, How Women's Stories Change What Power Means in Action, is what we're going to be talking about tonight as part of our theme, Winning at Life. In this book, Annette shares story after story of women who struggled with the limitations of power and understanding how to use it in both professional and personal settings. Annette is here to define and discuss what women can do to push back against what's called systemic gaslighting, the threats to our health and safety, the threats to our well-being. We're all aware of what's going on worldwide with, the tax on women and our liberties. And she's going to give you a few strategies for how to effectively be heard and move forward. So everybody join me in welcoming Annette Simmons to the show. Thanks, Annette, for coming.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, it's like, look at us twinning with our black turtleneck.
Yep. It's the standby.
Yeah, I'm channeling Steve Jobs. What can I say? So let's get started here. Let's start though before we get really into the meat of everything. Talk about what was your motivation. What sparked the fire in you to write this book?
Well, the fire started in the 90s. I had worked in international business, and I saw that there were problems that, from a woman's point of view, it's like, why are we doing this? Why would you waste time in the pissing contest when we could actually just work together? And so the first book I wrote was called Territorial Games. And it was because when I would walk out of a meeting and I would turn to someone and say, did you notice that they sort of shut down that area of inquiry? They go, oh no, I'm sure you misunderstood that. And I'm thinking, I didn't misunderstand a thing. When you start to speak and all of a sudden, well, nowadays they get their phone and they're like, oh yeah, what? No, keep going. These are little micro behaviors that cue women in this circumstance, women and minorities. It's basically the way to discriminate.
Right.
Shunning is a social form of it. Invisible walls, strategic noncompliance. So I didn't mention gender or race in that first book because it was my first book. And I wanted, and American Management Association published it. So anyway, I start doing this consulting, and we're all pretending that the real battles are between marketing and production and all that sort of stuff, when in the background, it's about who gets marginalized and who gets listened to. So then I wrote a book called A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth. And again, I don't mention race, I don't mention gender, but I know that they want the diversity of ideas. And so I teach people how to facilitate this honest conversation with like up to 30 people. And then the story factor, because I realized that, a lot of people just wanted to argue. And so what helped was taking someone through, a field trip of what you've experienced and seen, and you tell the story, and then all of a sudden they get a bigger picture about what's going on instead of just their one narrow view. I wrote 2 books about storytelling, but I'm 60. And all of those books were integrating feminine narratives, diverse narratives, the way to use collaborative to define the problem, not by whoever wins the battle of words, but to define the problem by piecing together 5 or 6 different points of view so that you end up with a bigger picture. And then I decided I'm going to go ahead and talk about gender, because that was the most profound difference. And I was miserable playing the man's game, and so many other women were. And I decided to figure out what is coercive about the environment we're in And what could we do about it? And one of the most important things for me is that women have been taught that when we feel empathy, that's touchy-feely
Right.
or a pathway to weakness. And so I began to realize that I even had discredited myself. You know, you don't use the touchy-feely language. I used to make a big joke when I was facilitating. I'd say, okay, now we all need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, just to mock, you know what I mean? To build credibility with the bros in the room.
Right.
So anyway, this book was an exploration where I asked women and men to tell me a story about the last time you were powerful. And what I found is that when women's stories also included what the men's stories were, which is, you know, financial goals, metrics. I got 17 callbacks for TV shows this month as opposed to 5 the month before. You know, this sort of quantitative. But when women tell their story, very often our accomplishment, our greatest joy in using our power would be in helping someone else in ways that really didn't turn up on our performance review, or bridging the gap between two people who didn't understand. And there's no tangible, you know, sort of value to that. And I began to
Right.
realize, wow, we've been trained to think that what we find joy in, and because that's what I think the difference is, men and women equally competent, but it's what we find joy in that's different. And so
I'm going to
business.
ask you a little bit more about that too as we go on, but I want to just go to the title, Drink from a Different Well. What does that mean? What is,
it
this is
has to
how's that concept?
It has to do with the joy, with where we find joy. So if you're a game player and you look at business as a game, to win or to lose, then you find joy in winning, which means that you're creating losers. Now, for women, we don't enjoy creating losers. We actually have an aversion. We have a natural desire to avoid harm. It's not that we don't take risk. We take risk, but we don't see the need to do harm
Right.
you know, and so we tend to pull from a different well. Yes, we, you know, like the fancy cars and the good salary. And we have this internal context where we measure ourselves in terms of how good a people we are and how many connections we have. And that's the different well that a lot of the men playing business as a game don't seem to need to dip their bucket into as often as we do.
I see. Okay. So you talked about, you have like a Me Too story from back in the 80s that you
Yeah.
talked about. I'm like, okay, 80, 90. Why, in spite of all the laws and all the social awareness, all the books, all the TV shows, all the newspaper articles, all the notice that men have about, how to conduct themselves in the workplace, why do you think this is still happening?
I believe that it's off their radar, the amount of harm done. I don't think they've internalized that this is real trauma. Um, and it just is going to take a while because we've had thousands of years of women being abused in these ways and being shut down. What happens is, in my particular case, I couldn't defend myself because my brain stopped, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and so I think two things need to happen. One is that we have to shift from this space where they say there's 4 stages to changing habit. There's unconscious incompetence. There's conscious incompetence where you know you're screwing it up, but you're still doing it. And then there's conscious competence, where it's like, okay, I'm going to treat women like they matter, you know. And then it's in stages. So it's been intellectualized for some people, For some men, it's just a game they like to play, and they're going to figure out a way to play it no matter what. They get off on it. But if we can build enough collective pressure, and we're doing that, it's just not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, it amazes me how many young girls have issues like that in the workplace, and they write my advice column. And what shocks me, Annette, is how few of them even understand that if they're being harassed like that, they have rights. These
Yeah.
things are against the law,
Yeah.
and they don't understand that. So it's there's a gap there somewhere
Well,
in
it's
teaching
not
this.
just that they don't understand it, they don't feel it. The fight, flight, and then freeze. Feminine narratives, when you get in deep doo-doo, rather than just fight or run, women, and you think about caveman times, froze. And that's because you can only carry so many kids by yourself. And that's because you need, food coming in, and we were a survival team. And so one of the things that I think evolution developed is the ability to, whenever this relationship is about to break, to bend. And that was functional. And now it's gone way too far.
I'd say, okay. So let's talk about this, a command that comes down to women all the time when they're in a different situation. No, take back your power. Take back your power. But, what does that even mean?
Right.
And, I wanted you, since this is your work, to define what power is. And is power, the concept, which I think you touched on briefly, is different for men than it is for women. So we do have that. But why is there such a thing as good power and bad power?
I think this is what happened when I ask. First of all, I'd ask my subjects, on a scale of 1 to 10, how powerful are you? And they look at me like, what do you mean how powerful? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you
What do you
mean by
think
how?
I mean?
And so I would get people into whatever their personal experience of power was. And it turned out that the masculine narratives would tend to evaluate their power based on dominating a situation. But when the women, which is that power over, and the women, we can do power over, when it's necessary. But what gives us joy is that power with. And so we have different goals for power. We have ambivalent feelings about power. Women would say, I went ahead and did that, but then I felt guilty, and then I felt bad about feeling guilty. And so we get described as wishy-washy, but the truth is that we're managing power in a way that could satisfy three to five different points of view instead of just one point of view. And when you're trying to optimize for all the cohorts, the stakeholders, then what happens is ambivalence. And it's because there's like, oh, well, if you do that, then this happens and that sort of stuff. And it's actually a form of intelligence to feel ambivalent. Clarity is you have to lie to yourself about something, to have that kind of clarity.
Right.
And so power is for women. I don't feel powerful if I am prevented from keeping people safe. And so in the nursing industry, a lot of, the attrition started before the pandemic.
Right.
And so a lot of the literature trying to find out why the nurses are leaving, we're able to point to this thing called moral distress. And when a system is so competitive and so metrically controlled that you no longer can take the 5 minutes to be kind and wait on somebody when they don't understand, or simply to just sit there and hold their hand, if you're preventing me from doing that, I feel powerless and handcuffed. And I think that happens at the top of corporate ladders as well. Women in a Harvard review could have these higher positions, and yet we don't want them. And I'm not talking about, there's obviously some women who do, but in general,
Right.
the bell curve, we're like, that's no life. And so when businesses get serious about having more women on the board, they're going to have to change the way they rank performance. They're going to have to change, they're going to have to separate the idea of risk avoidance from harm avoidance, and create a new way to define problems that is collaborative rather than domineering.
Right. Creating winners and losers.
Yeah.
A little bit of a win-win for everyone. I like that. Well, one thing that I run into a lot is boundaries. Okay, when women try to set boundaries, because this show primarily deals with interpersonal relationships, more of a romantic nature, but sometimes in careers as well. Let me give you a list of some of the names that have come across my desk. Okay. Well, first we're getting mocked, okay, for having a boundaries, okay. Then you get called names like ball buster, irrational, a damn feminist. You're angry. You're aggressive. You're some kind of woman that no man would want. You don't know how to act like a girl. You're not a team player. And then when you get into relationships, we're told, well, you act like that. You're not a good wife. You're too strong. You don't even need a man. You're not a good daughter. You don't listen. You're too willful. You're not submissive to your husband. You won't let him lead. It goes on and on.
I know.
It just goes on and on. It's like whatever you do is wrong. And women, they just want to stand up for themselves. They just want to have a space where they're heard and they're felt, their feelings matter, and their views are taken seriously. Doesn't happen. So what would you say is the best approach to handling this kind of negation of a woman's
Well, setting
power?
boundaries could also be viewed as teaching people how to treat you. And I remember back when I still was doing the, win, let's play the game of business to win. I would end up saying yes to things that financially looked like a good idea, but I would be bending over and doing more and more and more. And so I thought, well, if I say no, I feel like a bitch. And
Yay.
so on January 1 of that year, I decided that's going to be the year of the bitch. And I had predicated how I was going to react when I got pushback. I had mental rehearsals about not getting mad, just staying sane. And I really thought that I was going to get a lot of pushback, and I did get some. But what's interesting about, all the strategies you just listed, they're designed to get us angry, or to flip out. And it's disdain that we're experiencing. And yet nobody can insult you without your permission, and so it turned out that it was February of that year that one of my clients, I checked in the hotel after saying no to them for several things and expecting it to be a little shaky. I checked in the hotel. They had a fruit basket and a bottle of wine for me. I was like, wow. So this is what happens when you protect your boundaries. And
the respect basket.
Yeah. So understanding that, it is designed to get you to react. And if we react with anger or if it's part of that competitive narrative where they can shove us down, then they win. But if we refuse to be shoved down, then they're dealing with an adult, and it may take the second or third time, but we can earn the right to be treated like we want to be treated. And if we can't, then we need to walk away from that situation and find a new one.
Let's talk a little bit about chapter 2. Chapter 2, stories women tell about power that men don't. And you pointed out that we don't understand the routines and reasoning behind why men feel threatened by women's perspectives. That sentence really jumped out at me. I sat there and stared at that for a long time. Okay, so can you share a brief summary of your thoughts on
Yeah,
how men's
the
feeling
best
threatened by women's perspectives? I thought,
the well, they think that when we say no, that we've challenged their authority as if they had it in the first place. And so one of my favorite stories out of that chapter is Robin, a friend of mine. They come to the power company comes to chop all of the branches in her trees, to murder her trees, basically. And she ends up climbing up into the tree and will not let them cut those branches because the poles that the power company had were leaning to the side. And so she pointed out, you know what? If you straightened your pole, then your wires wouldn't be in my trees. And that really ticked them off. And it was a standoff for a long time. And so perseverance is one of our skill sets in this situation. They're trying to narrate the situation as being about the trees. So they have an idea that, well, it's cheaper to cut the trees than it is to straighten the poles. Therefore, the problem has been identified and they've solved it. We look at a bigger picture. Women tend to have a larger circle of moral concern. We're not just worried about the employees of this company. We're also worried about the suppliers in China with the people who are committing suicide because of the working conditions. And so we see a bigger picture, and the bigger picture that Robin saw was, your pole is leaning. And ultimately, we define the problem differently. And they considered us arguing over in a competitive way, and we're not. We've actually superseded that competitive narrative, and we've got a bigger picture. And with the bigger picture, then the problem changes and the solutions change.
I see. Okay. That makes total sense. That's a great story. Wow.
Robin, it's hilarious story, especially the way she told it. She's a piece of work. At one point she climbed up the tree, and at one point her neighbor says, "What's going on?" And she said, "Go in my house and get the Bible." And so she starts reading Genesis out of the top of the tree about how we're supposed to take care of nature and all that sort of stuff. She just was not going to give up. And I think
love that.
Yeah, that is, we get our feelings hurt and then we maybe stomp off or whatever. Staying sane, ooh, that's a very powerful position. Stacey Abrams talks about having more patience than anybody else is the ticket to achieving your goals.
Yep. Got to do that. Well, let's talk about this, what you just touched on there. I think a lot of women, how do I put this? The perseverance that you talk about, they don't have that. It's like if the guy asks them, even their children, the same question over and over, first they start with a no, but then at some point they switch over and give in.
Right.
Why do you think they
buy into the idea that they don't have rights? They start to live the masculine narrative, which is it's you that has to adjust, not me. And so what we do is we buy into that narrative that it's no use, that this is too hard. And I understand, because I get my hopeless moments too, where it's just easier to give in. And it is soulless to give in all the time. And we drain ourselves, and it just gets worse and worse. So finding one hill to stand on, in my case, that was, the work relationships in the year of the bitch, but finding one hill to stand on and standing on it until you get results demonstrates that A, you can get results, and B, that you can use this in all sorts of other areas. It's too much to take it all on at once.
Agreed.
Yeah, and there's, I'm sure if you're talking about relationships, you talk about that codependent thing that happens to all of us, where we're either in the persecutor, the rescuer, or the victim point of view, and even when we're the rescuer, even when we're trying to make things better for everybody, what we've done is we've set ourselves up to be abused. And particularly in circumstances like mine, being abused early trains us up to think, well, that's just the way it is. And so introducing a new narrative in your mind, where I have rights, and especially with children, I think sticking to boundaries with children is the best gift you can give to kids. And so it's that it's the meaning that we find once we start to take a stand about something that's important to us. And then that's where the perseverance comes from.
Okay. That sounds great. So we looking at, I'm thinking what you just touched on too. A lot of this is early childhood training. The parents seem to make different rules for the girls than they do their sons, and girls' ideas and thoughts and desires and opinions are downplayed, or they're not even allowed to express them at all.
Right.
As a parent, what can we do to be more cognizant of that? Because maybe we got trained that way, we don't really know any different. But if you have any thoughts on what people can think about to make themselves aware when they're going down that path, and to not treat their daughters that way, I would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I think that the boys don't cry ethic is just as damaging to the boys as it is to the girls, because they're trained to not be in touch with their emotions. And so there's two jobs to do. One is for the little girls to make sure that their opinions matter. But it's also to encourage the boys to express their own feminine narratives. And the way I define it, and of course this is an oversimplification, is simply this idea whether life is a game or whether it's a collaboration. And even for me, I made good grades, and so I was trained to achieve, and to only pay attention to recognition and being the best. Second best wasn't good enough. And so I incorporated that masculine narrative and just started treating myself that way. As a mom, it has to start with you. If you're not taking care of you, and you're not setting your own boundaries, and you don't have enough meaning in your life to feel like you matter, then it's going to be real hard to do that for your daughter or for your son. And so this book is really designed to counteract what we've been told about our feminine perspectives, which is that we're wishy-washy, we're too emotional. We're wishy-washy because ambivalence is in the world.
Right.
There's you're never a clear winner or a clear loser. It's both and empathy is a powerful skill that brings people together to share their stories in a way that creates larger stories and better solutions.
I love that. Well, as we close up our interview, do you have any closing comments on winning at life? With what can a woman do to start winning at life when it comes to her power?
Well, winning doesn't have to be just quantitative and tangible wins. Moral wins, spiritual wins, relationship wins. That gives us as much joy as anything else. And so I think not being ashamed of that anymore. You know what? This is what's important to me. And you'll find over time that other people begin to agree with you.
Oh, that was so excellent. Well, tell everybody where they can find you, Annette, find you online and, get your hold of your books and whatnot.
Oh, by the way, the 100 Best Business Books of all time, there were 3 women in
On a
the
list of
original
100?
out of a list of 100. And now there's 7 women. And I'm not sure they'll actually do it again. But so AnnetteSimmons.com is my private website. And then this particular book, I developed a website just for it. It's called differentwell.com. And the book is Drinking from a Different Well, How Women's Stories Change What Power Means in Action. And that's also on audiobook, as well as print and Kindle.
Okay. And ladies, you should know, Annette and I talked about when I told her, that I would like to do some different things with the channel. And, she offered to be a speaker at a book club meeting. It was one of the things that, I was thinking about doing for 2022. So Annette would be our first guest.
That would be a pleasure.
I would love that.
Yeah, these ideas need fleshing out, and I want to hear more people's opinion and start to look at strategies.
Yeah, and I think what's good about this particular platform is there are women from all over the world here. Some of them come and they type in the chat in a different language. I'm like, okay, I don't know what you just said, but I'm glad you're here. It's just little characters pop up on the screen. But, a lot from Canada, Korea, all over Europe, the Caribbean, just from everywhere. So
that's wonderful.
I think if we can get more participation, it'll give you a really good idea of what's going on with women just all over.
That'd be great. Wonderful. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Annette, so much for coming by. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Me too. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Talk to you later. Okay, you guys, that was Annette Simmons. And I'm telling you, after Debruary, I don't really have the time right now to thoroughly read every book that comes in before the interview. But this is one that I have got to read it because just the part that I did read up through chapter 3 was just so fabulous, and she just really hits the nail on the head. So a lot of the concepts there, talking about power and feel, just trusting yourself, is all part of this theme of making you a better woman, more in touch with who you are, more accepting of yourself. And I think that she was a great addition to this month's programming. So thank you very much, and I will see you guys tomorrow.